we need to start having these personal conversations, and we need to start talking about what are the consequences of hate and dehumanization. There's consequences. Words matter. And we really need to pay attention to our words, and we need to respect one another and recognize that we're all in this together, and we've got to solve these things together. We've got to start talking to one another. We have to learn history. We have to understand where each of us came from. We need to own up to our stories.
Yes.
We need to own up to our stories.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and I am in conversation with myself and with Linda. And Linda, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how do I pronounce your last name?
Broenniman.
See, I knew I just was trying to sound it all out. I am literally dyslexic. I was homeschooled for a while. And so, I don't even pretend to know how to do things. And I'm going to start sort of at a weird place. I just recently spoke with NPR book critic Martha Ann Toll about her excellent book, Three Muses, set during the Holocaust. And during that interview, I raved to her about this book, which is your book, called The Politzer Saga. And I'm not sure if I have a book that looks like the final book, if that's the cover, because it's an advanced copy.
Yeah, it's close. If I can show it to you,
Please do.
That.
Oh, nice. A nice hardcover. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, this will be, I've started by talking about someone else's book, but I told her, I said, if it's the only book you review this year, please, please, please pay attention to Linda's book. Because I just read it preparing for this interview with many dog-eared pages. I mean, really read it, copied it, wrote in it, have notes. And this will be an odd thing to say at the beginning of an interview, and I haven't done this right. I've got to talk all about the fact it's a podcast and where you can get it. But I walked away from this book literally loving you as a human. I never have said this to an author before. I love you. And I mean,
thank you.
I mean that seriously, because I have never witnessed a resurrection before. I've never seen anybody bring anyone else back from the dead. And I cannot imagine, I could not have imagined this book had I not read it. Usually I can imagine a book if I hear a description, because the odds of you being raised as a Roman Catholic to adulthood, not having a clue that your family was Jewish, and then you find out that not only were they Jewish, but they changed their names and their religion in Hungary before the Nazis even come to power, because the Hungarians themselves had this deep strain of anti-Semitism going back into the Catholic background. Here you are being raised within a religion that has literally annihilated the memory of your family in an indirect and sadly direct way. You find out who you really are, and then that's not enough for you. You then spend, and we're going to talk about this, I don't know how many years, digging back through the ruins of two civilizations, pre-war Hungary and the rise of Nazi Germany, an entire world war, and the destruction of not just your family, but your family's memory, up to the point where you're raised in a family that doesn't pass on any knowledge except for one cardboard box in an attic that survives a fire. I mean, really, if you don't get a movie out of this or something, forget all that crap you're watching on Netflix. This is the one, guys. This is the book.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say one more thing before I just bow out and talk to you the way an interviewer is supposed to. But I was really blown away by this. There were several places in the book where it brought tears to me. And one of them, and I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to have to put my glasses on and read it, that I just found moving to the point of real, really deep emotion. And that is, you're talking about your grandfather, Sandor. And you say there is no record of Sandor's death. He had been, I believe, moved to Dachau at the end.
Yeah.
And then there's tuberculosis and all sorts of reasons you can die. And you asked, did Sandor die on the journey? Did he even go on the journey? His name was found on an alphabetical list by name, not prisoner number. thought to be created by the remaining prisoners for the American soldiers after they liberated Dachau on April 29th. And then you go on and you show where his name appears. And then you have this thing that literally tears sprang from my eyes because I just felt so deeply for you and for him and just for everybody. I don't know how and when he died, but I do hope that he was in American hands. I hope he knew he was free and that he experienced acts of kindness in his final days. I hope someone called him by his name and restored dignity to his soul. Now, I'm a grandfather right now. I just spent the afternoon cooking for 2 grandchildren who are sick at home while their parents work. I mean, actually did. And all I can do is tell you that as one grandfather speaking to you, a granddaughter he didn't know, I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. And
I
you
really
so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
I mean, you didn't meet him and you've remembered him. You brought him back to life for me. I love this guy, by the way. I love his pictures and he's just a person in my life now. And he didn't exist. He was taken away from us. And now he's one of my people. And your whole book is like that. And I don't even know where to start. So I'm going to ask you a strange question to begin with. I was brought up in an evangelical conservative background that I've left. And I'm now in a very politically and religiously different place. And that caused enough trauma. But if I had been told, weren't you 28 or something when you found out?
Yeah, about that. Yes.
Yeah, if I had made it
20.
into my mid to late 20s and I found out that in addition to the religion that I was having doubts about, they had been the enemy of my family just 2 generations back, I don't know how I would handle it. So I just want to go there first emotionally for you. What has it done to you to find out that everything you knew is not true in one way? How do you feel about having been a Catholic, now understanding you're Jewish? The Catholic Church you came out of was not neutral to your people. They were their enemy, really. I just don't get it. To me, I read your book, and it's called, again, The Politzer Saga. Very few books have made my head explode. This book made my head explode.
Oh, thank you.
Period. That's it, all I'm going to say. Now I want to hear from you.
It's a very complicated answer to a very complicated question. I think I have to start with how I was brought up, but even before that, just as you said, the Catholic Church was horrific during the Holocaust. And in Hungary was a very, very Catholic country. And most of the bishops, I did a lot of reading of history so that I could really understand the zeitgeist of the times where each of these people lived, the culture, the thinking, and so on. And I was just blown away by how I just couldn't believe how horrible the Catholic bishops were. You know, they denied the only Jewish law that they objected to was the one that disallowed marriages, because there were so many intermarriages at that point, they would have lost a lot of parishioners and wealthy parishioners. So the Catholic Church was horrible, but there were a lot of Catholic priests and nuns who risked their lives to try to save Jews.
Which, by the way, you write about. For those who haven't read the book, you're very fair. Right. You give them great credit. Just saying.
Right. And my mother was one of them. My mother was a devout Catholic, but she risked her life. Not later on. I didn't even know when she was awarded the Righteous Among the Nations. I didn't even know that she had saved my father and my grandmother. She was given the person who nominated her for that award was her best friend, and she'd save her best friend, her best friend's family, and a lot of people. And your dad. And my dad, after he escaped from labor camp. But
yeah, and I just add, for people who don't know, the award for the righteous Gentile is something that is awarded, and she was at Yad Vashem when she got it, where I've been, by the way. I visited it, and It's for people who are non-Jews who risk their life to save Jews. And the evangelicals, for instance, names like Corrie ten Boom, other people in Holland who did the same thing, are awarded this high award. And then another poignant moment in the book, she has her memory loss and Alzheimer's as she's getting the award. And then all of a sudden, you can tell the story, she remembers something, and it's like a magical moment when she suddenly understands what's going on. Can you just do that moment? Because, and then we'll go back into your big answer.
Sure. Well, there's actually two things that she had said. There was the box, which then I looked high and low. I
Right.
searched that house and could never find it.
Right.
But the other thing that she had said, I'll never forget this. A reporter approached her. There were several reporters there, and news was there, and so on. And a lot of, with her Alzheimer's, I think she was a little taken aback. But one of the reporters asked her, "How did you have the courage to do this?"
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "I did what any human being would do."
Yeah.
And that was her humanity. So going back to your original question, because I think it all ties in, she was just an unbelievable person. She's my mom, so I didn't know she was an unbelievable person, but she was. And she always raised us to believe that you treat every single person with the utmost respect. It doesn't matter their religion, the color of their skin, their economic status, their anything. You treat everybody with respect. So we always grew up that way. And I have to be honest, even though we went to church every week and every Sunday, and I had to go to religious instructions, I think I skipped more religious instructions. We had a window and I boogied out the back. And so religion never was that important to me.
Hmm.
And so when I found out I was Jewish, it was almost as if it didn't surprise me.
Hmm.
It did surprise me. And I think what was worse was we were also raised to tell the truth.
Hmm.
So I was so angry that here my father hadn't told the truth, nor my mother, because she was complicit in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I think that really got to me. I was angry. And I think for a long time, I just stuffed that anger. I was busy. I was, when you're 28, you're busy with, what's your life going to look like? What's your career going to look like? And I just couldn't go there. But it just kept gnawing at me, and then when my mother got, I did go a couple times after that to Budapest with my parents, and my mother told me a few stories. And even her, from her, and we were very close, and I thought she always confided in me, but she didn't tell the truth either. She told pieces of it, but she kept his secrets. She would not reveal. She revealed some things, but I realized there were a lot that she didn't reveal, or she sort of changed the story to protect him. So when I finally started digging in and found this stuff, it was a process of, sort of reconciliation. Why did they lie? What was going on? And when you read about some of these characters, my parents were both doctors, and they believed in serving humanity. I mean, service was their foundation, and my father was going to cure cancer and do all of, great things. And that was their focus. So it was very interesting to me that he had these incredible doctors in his family. Adam, who today is considered the father of otology. You talk to almost any ENT and they recognize his name.
Yeah.
Still today.
Well, you had so many famous, successful people in that family tree that, totally aside from the fact that you were Jewish being hidden by masking the reality of who your family was. I mean, you know, names like Soros and the Rockefeller, all sorts of people jump out that had some connection. You were a very involved group of people on a very, very high level, which brings up this question of just how amazing it was that, you know, that you can disappear that strata, that level of people, and just the idea of all the forgotten names across the board. I mean, how many families have anybody that digs up a cogent history of their past like you have of yours, let alone that it's been hidden on purpose?
Right.
And one aspect of this book that I just find amazing, and there's so much to dig into here, is just your work. And then you found this one pivotal person who you can name, who helped you, without whom, sort of like the box you found of the papers, and then you find this person to help you translate. I'm going to introduce you properly because I've totally blown this part of the conversation. You know, this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My guest today has written an incredible book called The Politzer Saga. This is a pre-release copy. It's in hardcover. You all must run out and buy this book. It is spellbinding. Just make sure, don't start it unless you're sitting somewhere you can finish it, because you will not stop reading. And it's got all the photographs and backup. It's an extraordinary document of history, of life, of a family, and so forth. I don't know how to plug a book more wildly than that, but I'm just telling you. And you were the middle child of 7, blah, 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 born of Hungarian physicians who survived World War II and started their new life in the US in 1949, etc. And we're talking all about that. So let's get back now to the story of the creation of the book. You're in your mid to late 20s. You think you're a Roman Catholic. And what is the line between then and the book? And what are the big things that got this thing done? And how on earth did you do it? How long did it take you? How many miles did you travel? Where did you go? Somebody's got to do the story of the Politzer Saga, the story of the writing of it, because
the story of the story.
Yeah, the story of the story, because, you know, you're an amazing person. And this book, this is the evidence of your work. But I know a lot of people who do stuff. I've never run into anything like your book. I've never run into anybody who's gone back this deeply into their family. And you do it so well because you know, one can follow the whole story, but you do it, as it were, and this is the wrong way to describe it, forgive me, you can put it better, but almost as a series of short family histories of various parts of your family. So it never gets boring, because the overarching story is the resurrection of an entire clan of brilliantly successful people who were obliterated, literally and figurative. You found them all. You bring out incredible details about each of their lives. And then you found someone who was pivotal in translating all this. Without that box of stuff and without this man who helped you, none of this happened.
Right.
So it's like a miracle.
It is. You know something, I don't know how else to describe it. When you think about the box, okay, you think about the contents of the box. Contents of those boxes, in many cases, survived World War I, World War II, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956.
Yep.
My parents' house fire. And I mean, that's 4. It's just, it is a miracle that box, the contents of that box was saved. And so, and there is something that it all sort of happened in the right timing and so on. So, I will tell you, when I found that box, when my sister sent me the box, and she, by the way, after the fire, it ended up in the back of one of her closets, and just by accident, she found it. And it was the time when I had decided, okay, I was going to look into my family, and she sent it to me. And so I open up this box, and it's, you know, musty and filled with all these dog-eared folders and so on. But, Hungarian's a really, really hard language. So Google Translate, Microsoft Translate, they don't really work very well.
And not only that, Hungarian, the government at one point was using Latin on top of everything else. Just in case you figured out the Hungarian, now we're going to translate the Latin.
Exactly. So, and then some of it was in German and so on. So I knew I needed a translator, and I was looking around, and then a friend of a friend of a friend. So it's like another miracle, right? Just this woman, I went to her house. She lives a half an hour from me. Her name was Anna Bayer. Just the most passionate wonderful person.
Hmm.
And I brought her some of the folders, and we happened to go through it, and she looked at these documents. You know, I thought I'd be there an hour. We spent the entire day. And finally I said, I know you've got a family. I better go.
Yeah.
But it was also the most incredibly emotional day. And she
Yeah.
told me things I never knew, like the Yellow Star houses.
Yes.
That was unique to Budapest. So when instead of putting all the Jews in the ghetto, they would assign a house.
Yeah.
And my entire family went from this huge apartment house. I think I show it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 different, basically family members, but different, generations.
Yeah.
They have to go into one room, and they have 5 days to do it.
Yeah.
So there are things like that I didn't know about at all. History
Well,
that I didn't.
parenthetically, that sometimes the Germans, maybe even the Gestapo or SS, were shocked by the ferocity of the Hungarians in the way they were treating Jews, and they thought, like they were shocked by how horrible they were. And, these are Nazis being shocked by anti-Semites who were Roman Catholics and not Nazis. I mean, that predate their invasion.
When Eichmann came in March of 1944, he basically said, I think he only had like 20 Germans with him. He said, we don't need that much more. The Arrow Cross, the Hungarian Nazi Party, the Arrow Cross, they'll do our work for us.
Yeah, they're taking care of it.
Yeah. I mean, it was horrible.
Horrible.
But I think I lost my train of thought. I'm not sure.
You were talking. We're doing the story of the story.
Oh, that's right. The story.
And you're talking to a lady. She's got her whole day, and you're both growing old.
Sorry about
things
that.
Taking years, and then now, but you still have to translate a lot of stuff.
Right. So she said basically, and the one document that was of real significance was my great grandfather, who at that point in 44 was 98 years old. And he wrote a letter to Governor Horthy asking for an exemption from the Jewish restrictions. And it's just an incredible letter. And by the way, he did get an answer, and he got the exemption. By that time it was too late. But and when he got the exemption, this tells you something about him, which this always makes me cry. He refused to take off the yellow star and wore it with pride. That's the kind of person he was. He was just amazing. But so at any rate, I digress. I apologize. But so back to Anna. She was just this vivacious person, and she had a lot of contacts. So people at the Holocaust Museum, people at various other Holocaust museums throughout the world, and Andras Kaczynski. And Andras Kaczynski, he was my next miracle.
And his picture's in the book, and you talk about him. But where did you meet him first?
Anna introduced me, and we worked on Zoom for a long time. So he was in
Hungary the whole time.
He was in Budapest. And
then after a while, you go over there.
Yeah. But I only got to spend 5 days with him in person, and they were he's just amazing. And I just got back from Budapest last night and spent 7 days there, and was with his widow and his. And
what was his motivation for helping you? Somebody calls you and says, "I got this thing. I found all this stuff in a box." Talk about why he was able to help you in terms of his qualifications and his knowledge and skill and life experience. Tell us about him.
Yes, he had been. He'd been in government. He was a brilliant man, and because he did not go with the Orban government, he had been blackballed and out of work for 8 years. Yeah,
so basically he's a casualty of the rightward drift of modern Hungary.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're starting the whole story over again. I mean, not your story, but the direction of Hungary.
Right. And so, and he was born in a town called Papa, which was a little bit west of Budapest. It was a small town. It had about 3,500 Jews, and after the war, I think less than 200 came home. And so he and Laszlo Reich, which I will get into who Laszlo Reich is in a minute, had done an exhibit called Our Forgotten Neighbors. And it was a beautiful, beautiful exhibit. There's a beautiful book that he did. It's amazing. So he was not Jewish, but very interested in the plight of the Jews. And he ended up being buried in the Jewish cemetery, which is a very unusual thing. Almost no non-Jews get buried in a Jewish cemetery. But he just loved the Jews. And when Anna told him about this, he was so excited.
Yes.
I did not have to do any convincing at all. He was right there. He's, our first phone call, he had already looked up my great-great-grandfather, the one I had mentioned, Ignaz Misner. And he said, I've already found, just doing a simple Google search, I've already found 300 articles on him.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. I mean, how fortuitous that so many members of your family were so illustriously visible and successful and left, I mean, beside the human story, left enough evidence of their passage on Earth to have the pieces to pick up.
Exactly. And he was just brilliant. He could find clues, little clues in places that you would never expect, and that would lead to a thread, and to another thread, and to another thread. But he was also meticulous. So if he found something, he checked like 3 or 4 different sources to make sure it was true. And it's really hard. For example, Zygmunt Politzer Zygmunt Politzer had written a biography, which is where we got the foundation for many of the early stories.
Yeah.
And Zygmunt Politzer, Zygmunt could be spelled 4 or 5 different ways, and Politzer could be spelled 4 or 5 different ways.
I was noticing that in the narrative with all these different spellings and how this is the same person in all these different places. That was a little wrinkle that I noticed on the way through the book.
Yeah, so you can imagine for a researcher who needs to know that he's got the right person and the right story, he checked it, umpteen different ways. And so he was just brilliant and very devoted to the truth and very devoted to bringing these stories out. He thought they were really important. So, yeah, no,
it's just amazing. I'm going to turn the page a little bit here. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. It is a live event on Facebook, goes to YouTube, and then shows up where podcasts show up. And if you like this, please like it in the online sense of liking our thing and subscribing and doing all that stuff people do. And I'm talking with, and I'm going to let you say your name again, Linda. I get that part.
Broenniman,
that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I can remember that, but I just, every time I look at it, I start trying to sound the Politzer
just forget
Saga,
the O.
I can say the Politzer Saga. I can say the title of the book. And if I had to, as an author, speaking as an author, it's like, I don't care if you can say Schaeffer or not, just say the title of my book. The Politzer Saga is all you got to remember. You'll figure out who wrote it later. But in any case, just to turn the page here, we're living in a day and age when, I mean, this book would have affected me on a human level, a father, a grandfather, a human being. But I don't, in the last couple of days, for instance, Elon Musk has just tweeted 25 times calling out the Anti-Defamation League and really going after them. There's a lot going on that reminds me of Henry Ford in 1920 that published a regular newspaper calling the international Jew a threat. I am not saying history is exactly repeating itself, but if you had asked me, I'm 71 years old, and if you had asked me when I started to think about things in the late 1960s, if in the year 2023, we were going to be facing a rise of global anti-Semitism, even in the United States, and that we'd have this thing called tech bros who are sort of libertarians out for themselves that don't want regulation and therefore are kind of against government interference with them. And then they're sort of blaming Jews for this in some weird way. And you hear Soros being thrown around. The context in which the Politzer Saga is being published is not neutral. this book is as relevant as anything you can read, because here's a family history. You know, numbers like 6 million are too big for our human brains, just like global warming, future planning. We can't deal with it. But I can deal with the fact that on the tidal marsh near where I live, the grass that I see is changing. A couple of trees are dying. That I can deal with. Well, similarly in this book, in a strange way, it brings, because it's not just about the Holocaust, because it's about Roman Catholic pre-Holocaust anti-Semitism, because Hungary is moving to the right again, because Viktor Orban is in touch with the very people like Tucker Carlson and others who love him, because he is resurrecting this right-wing thing. The family that was destroyed is like part of us now because of you, but don't think this can't happen. Don't think that this can't be repeated. I find this moment of history terrifying, just as a human being. And I am horrified. I don't even know how to begin that conversation with you, with your background in this, but I would say if anybody I've talked to recently, with the possible exception of Martha Ann Toll, who's a Jewish human rights activist, who also is a book critic for NPR, you know, I think you and she are very, very, very well placed to talk about this. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, and that's not what your book is about, but I cannot avoid this subject. And I may have stated it wrong, and I may have many things wrong, but this is not a small thing. This is a big deal right now.
It's interesting. We were just in Hungary because there's an exhibit based on these stories in the Rambach Synagogue. And through this process also, so we were there to celebrate the exhibit. And one of the, two of the people that were there were cousins that I had met through this process that I talk about in the book. It's actually Zygmunt Pulitzer's great-grandson. And we were talking about just what you were saying. And someone, Anne is part of a book club, and the book club said, you know, haven't we read enough Holocaust stories? And she said, you know, should be not only 6 million stories, a story for each person who died, but then more than that for all those that survived. So there's never enough stories. Yep. And I think, you know, it's interesting because when I wrote the book, my original, I never thought I'd be writing a book. I never thought I'd be sitting here talking to you or anybody about a book. I started writing it because I needed to connect to my family. Yes, absolutely. And it was the best way that I knew how to connect to my family.
Well, you hadn't just lost them. They had been kept from you.
Exactly. It's like they died twice. Yeah. They died, you know, once in their natural lives, and they died once because they were hidden.
And they were hidden because people left so shell-shocked, fear-filled, gun-shy. Hey, keep your head down, even in America. Let's just start over, which itself is a testimony to the disastrous horror of what happened and what can happen again. And the fact, again, that it tied into the Roman Catholicism is shocking, because here we are again.
Exactly.
In Hungary again.
Right. But, you know, when I finished this book and shared it with people and so on, everyone said, you need to do this book just because of what you just said. You know, we need to understand the consequences of hate. I mean, why do we hate other people? You know, we're all one. We're all the same. Yeah. So why, you know, and I think looking at it, just as you said, person by person, understanding their story, hopefully people can begin to understand that we are all just the same. I mean, these people also, they wanted to, you know, be educated, educate their family, you know, bring them up in a safe environment. Yeah. But you know, and when they faced these, you know, just unimaginable hardships, they also had such incredible resilience. And you know, they weren't going to give in.
Yeah, it kept going.
They were going to keep going. And
But something I want to say, and I'm not trying. This is not a wrap up at all because we're in the midst. But I just don't want to forget this because I'm 71. I forget stuff. But it seems to me that the way I would pitch the Politzer Saga, if I was, if I was your publicist in a sense, or if I was, as I will when I talk, I already did. I talked about this book with a book critic. I wasn't going to miss the opportunity.
Thank you.
As an author, I can't imagine liking anybody more than someone who would do that. So
thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, but the Politzer Saga, if I was saying this, I would just say, this is, quote, another Holocaust story, but it's different because I don't know how to put this without tearing up again. This is a family who was lost. And to know the 6 million, you can't. But to know one of the 6 million, this is one of 6 million stories. And to me, it was just heartrendingly beautiful because you've done such a good job and you've made these people, you've made your family live again, your grandfather and so forth. And just that line that I talked about at the beginning of you hoped he was looking at a friendly face as he died, basically, is what you were saying. And it's so moving to me. It's just so moving to me because I don't know the 6 million, but I know your family. And that's a road into something bigger. So, it's like hearing that the reefs are dying. But if there's one little patch of beach well, and something's going wrong with it, it's personal now. It's like my little piece of beach. Well, the Politzer family is my family now because you brought them into my life. And so I know your family. And so it's a little tiny emotional window into a bigger story. And so this is not, quote, another story of many. This is an incredible book of a resurrection of an entire family by someone who herself is a story. You're a story and a kind of a hero because who does this? Who takes time out? Which brings me to something off the track here, but I got to ask it. What, you've done, this is not your whole life. Tell me about your own life, beside the fact you grew up Catholic and found this story. Who are you without this book? What makes you tick? My grandchildren, I've been married 53 years. I got my wife pregnant when we were 17 and 18. We have a whole story, whatever stuff I do, that's who I really am. Who are you besides this?
Well, my career was in business. So
right.
The opposite, right? But I was always an entrepreneur. So I loved, building companies. I got involved with a lot of startups and just enjoyed building things. So
your grandfather would be proud of you.
Yeah, thank you. And I was very lucky to have a real success at one point in 2015, which then allowed me the time to do this. And
you're being very modest. Fill us in. Come on, give us the sexy Hollywood version of your successes.
I have to tell you, I don't like talking about myself.
I know, I can see that, but I'm training you for the future. You're going to be very in demand. You have to get up there and not say, "Oh, I've had a few."
Yeah. I've just been entrepreneur tend to be on the financial side with technology companies and then some diagnostic companies that were there was one company that I actually started with my mom. So that was sort of fun. And now it's a public company. So it's sort of fun to have that.
Do we not talk about this in terms of we can't be told what company you started, or is like
that the original name was Hemex and it's now called Athlon.
Okay. All right.
So, but there's I've just done a lot of things, a lot of fun things. I just enjoy it. But one of the things I also want to mention when I started this, my husband and I ended up not officially adopting, but we had 2 young Afghan girls that came to live with us. And we're just so proud of them now because here they are now 7 years later, and one's in medical school and one's in law school. So I almost feel like, when I look at the Pulitzers, and most of them were either lawyers or doctors,
yeah.
I just feel very proud of them. So.
Well, and the fact that you sort of you got 2 souls out of a equally horrific situation, and you can't do everything, but I've gotten to know your family through the book, and you've taken these 2 Afghan young women, and now you've you brought one family back from the dead, and you've given a whole new life to 2 young women. And so it's a wonderful story. I keep saying you are a wonderful story.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, let's all right. Well, that was it for the personal deep dive. Anyway, let's jump back into this thing for a second on the book. What's going on with the book as we speak? I got an advance copy. I see you have a hardcover. Where is it just on the chart right now in terms of, is it out? Is it in stores?
It's going to come out next week, next Tuesday, the 12th.
Perfect timing.
Up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places. So yeah.
Either you can say in bookstores everywhere, or it's on Amazon and in the remaining bookstore.
Yeah. I hope it'll be in some more bookstores too. It would be great. So
well, listen, let me give you a tip on something. Author to author, surprisingly, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but Book TV is what you want, and they allow you to invite them to your own event. So if you do a signing in a college or a synagogue somewhere or in a university, it doesn't even have to be a bookstore or a bookstore reading plus Q&A. All right. Make sure that somebody's working to get Book TV in there, because the funny thing is I've had a few bestsellers, and one of the things where you saw real spikes was not the Today Show, which I've been on and done a few things like that back in another lifetime, but my Book TV stints, they repeat. So you do it, you get to, it isn't like this where I'm supposed to be in charge, but not very well. Doing my thing. They let you do your thing. So you can take a full hour, you can hold forth and talk, take questions, answer the questions you really want to be asked, as it were, tell the story of your book any way you want to, hold it up, show pictures, the camera will show them. It's really your program. And then they will run it on again and again and again on C-SPAN. And believe it or not, Book TV has a huge audience, and it's an audience that actually reads books, which is unusual because, like, I know I have some readers who watch this, but a lot of things you think are, oh, this is a big deal, I'm on such and such, but actually, do they go out and buy a book? But the Book TV people actually do sometimes. So
interesting.
Put a pin in.
Interesting.
Make sure you get an event on Book TV.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
One of the things I really wanted to do is I really wanted to make this book come alive, as alive as I could.
Yeah.
So you've seen you have the advanced copy, so you've seen the pictures and the maps and so on, and the family trees. I had 2 wonderful Hungarian young designers design this for me. Yeah. And I'm so pleased with the way the pictures came out.
Me too, because a lot of them are difficult because they're old or faded. But the thing is, you also have some full-page portraits, which really pop, as well as some other ones that are a little more obscure just because of how they were. But it looks great. And one thing I love about the book is that the pictures are throughout. When you have signatures of book, a signature in the middle, the way they used to do with books on a glossy paper, it's always frustrating because you're in the book, you want to see, but you've got them placed where you are in the story.
Yeah, that was important to me. I really wanted them.
I just think that's so important. And also the documents, including the scary documents by bad people, bad documents, Nazis, and horrible things to show you just how.
Even, talking about scary documents, one of the things that shocked me, and this is not the Nazis, it's the communists afterwards. Yeah. You have, for example, the story of Margit, who, she lived through World War I, she lived through World War II, she survived. Yeah. And then afterwards, after she paid the inheritance taxes on the properties. Yeah. She fixed, the one house, the roof was bombed, and she repaired the roof, and then she's expelled to some, farm community way outside Budapest, and then her house is taken over by the communists.
I know.
All of her properties.
When you look at the history of Hungary and the thumbnail of it, I grew up in Switzerland and lived in Europe until I was in my 20s, then moved here. But we would know people. My parents were running an evangelical ministry, And I remember Marika, who was a Hungarian, who arrived at my parents' ministry, irrespective of the fact that I've since left that fold. My parents really were really good people. They really reached out to people. And Marika's feet were still bandaged, having climbed over barbed wire, escaping Hungary in, I think it was 1959. And that's a childhood memory, because she was in the back bedroom and my mom would go in there and change bandages on her feet. And she had made it all the way to Switzerland, who knows what, hiding in trains. I mean, there was a whole story there. But I just want to show a picture of your parents, Julian and Clara, in 1945. So I'm guessing this picture was taken, was it taken in the States? I get my dates wrong.
No, it was probably taken in Hungary when they got married.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the thing to see if it's on. Yes, there they are.
Yeah.
That's your mom and dad. Bless them. And like I say, I've adopted them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really, I'm being serious. I just feel so strongly about you brought them to life so well. Everybody in this book is my family now. But while I'm flipping through the pages, here's your beautiful grandfather Sandor, in his favorite restaurant in 1935, before all hell breaks loose. This is your grandfather. That's Sandor. And I love Sandor.
Yes.
And I do hope the last face he saw was friendly.
I do too. It breaks my heart.
Yeah, that's Sandor. What a beautiful man. What a beautiful human being.
You know, and to think, apparently, my father said that he was an incredible poet. He was a beautiful poet. And he, you know, was a real athlete too. He loved his tennis. He loved his, you know, he was a high jumper in school. Despite the war moving toward Budapest, on Sunday, March 18, 1944, Sandor and Bozai? Bougie, which is, so her real name is Erzsébet, which would be Elizabeth. And so Bougie is like Beth. Okay, like Beth. Okay, Sandor and Bougie, Beth, attended a ball at the mansion of the Ford Company, representative to Hungary. They made it home at early dawn without a problem. They had a relaxing breakfast. Marguerite's hairdresser set her hair, a weekly ritual. The cooks prepared lunch. They were finishing their dessert when the phone rang. My father's former tutor was calling to tell Sandor that the Germans had arrived. Adolf Eichmann and the Nazis were marching into the city. Gabor wrote in his book, the Ambrus family hid a lot of stuff that day. A month later, on April 24, a messenger brought a note to Sandor that he was to report to the Gestapo prison in 3 days. Friends and family begged him not to go. He could get false papers and go into hiding, but he feared that doing so would endanger his family. On April 27th, he was escorted to the Jewish Theological Seminary, and you'll have to help me on the pronunciation, on Rock Suzard. You know something, just I can't do the Hungarian presentation. I can't do it either. So, which had been turned into an auxiliary detention house. On June 26, Sandor wrote a letter to his colleague that he was at the Horthy Liget camp. In the letter, he asked that his writing and documents be saved. I just loved that. He knew he was done for. He had sacrificed himself for his family, but he wanted a trace of his existence saved. There's just such a story here. We don't know if he also wrote a letter to his family, but he did not arrive. A junior officer hid the documents in the rock cellar of the bank. They were never found, and the junior officer disappeared after being deported to a Russian prisoner of war camp. So, you know, there's so much in that. It's like the scene from I don't know what, but it's so moving. And in that story, you have someone who's been persecuted, who's hiding, who's saving his family, who's sacrificing himself because he thinks by complying, he'll give them more of a chance. The Germans are arriving. And then there's this allusion to the Russians who are coming next. And I just, you know, we Americans are not only isolated from history, you know, we think we can do anything. And so we trivialize the rise of fascism in our own midst sometimes. We trivialize anti-Semitism as if it's all just part of the discussion.
And, I would just look at my contemporary Americans and say, don't you understand? This is the real story of humanity. We have a few lucky seconds here to salvage what's left of our own patrimony and democracy, or we're going to, 100 years from now, there's going to be people writing stories like this about how we gave away what happened. So, my Ernie just texted me something here in the message section, which is good. He says, what is the most important thing for us who are for humanity to do when we see this happening in front of us, such as right now in Ukraine, again, or the sympathy for Putin with somebody like Tucker Carlson, who also glibly alludes to anti-Semitism, like this can't happen again, and is sort of, shockingly on the side of Viktor Orban, who cans this guy who helped you because he's not far enough to the right. I don't even know where to start, but I have to pick your brains on this as a human being and someone who's delved into this. I mean, what on earth? What do we do with this, a non-historical public that doesn't care or seems not to understand what's at stake here, when there's so many currents in the world starting this whole process again, and not just for Jews, for Ukrainians, for everybody who falls afoul of this right-wing fascist march, whether it's Putin's forces raping women as an act of war, whatever. It's like, we've seen all this before. What on earth do we do?
It's a very good question, but I think from my standpoint, from where I am, I think I go back to what you had said. You can't think about 6 million. You can't think about, but you can think about the personal. And so I think we need to start having these personal conversations, and we need to start talking about what are the consequences of hate and dehumanization. There's consequences. Words matter. And we really need to pay attention to our words, and we need to respect one another and recognize that we're all in this together, and we've got to solve these things together. We've got to start talking to one another. We have to learn history. We have to understand where each of us came from. This is one part of the world, but there's other parts of the world, and even the US, with racism and so on. We need to own up to our stories.
Yes.
We need to own up to our stories.
Yeah, and I love the idea of talking to each other. The other day we had an author on who was doing a book. He's sort of a famous guy, and Ernie will text me the name right, because I'm so in your story, I've forgotten everything else. But Patrick Deneen, I think, who's written this book about, from a conservative position. And I know I'll get some blowback from people on the left who are my usual watchers. But when I talked to him, I said, we have to talk to each other. We have to reach out to the more reasonable elements on the opposite side who will still talk to somebody with my point of view before it's too late, and show our side that not everyone we disagree with is a monster, that they, just as there were people in Hungary who were Roman Catholics, who took amazing Catholic-inspired risks to save people their own church was abandoning and attacking.
Exactly.
So, Patrick Deneen's a good man, and I reached out to him and interviewed him about his book, and I'm glad I did, because we've got to talk to each other. But then, of course, I brought up where I disagreed and so forth, and then there's a line I'm not going to cross with anybody and interview some people we won't mention. But I think that's part of it, and I think the other part of it is that just as your book makes real the 6 million, because here's one family and you get to know them, somehow the humanity is stripped away from people in our discussions, whether it's the right or the left discussing each other. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree. I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where, we take these positions, and sometimes we don't even know why we take these positions, and we defend them without even understanding the consequences of it. And I think we need to listen to one another and try to understand one another. And through discussion, who knows, you might change somebody's mind, and you may not. But if they understand the story and it becomes more personal instead of these just generalizations and these broad statements.
Broad strokes. And, I want to recommend the Politzer Saga. I know there's a lot of teachers out there. My son has taught high school for the last 25 years, and physics and humanities, and I know a lot of people in education on various levels, but I seriously recommend this book as an all-school reading for people who have the power to do that, because this one, I have 5 grandchildren and 3 grown kids. I do know kids. I work with my grandchildren all the time. This is a book that Jack, who's 13, and Lucy, who's 15, will be reading soon. If I have anything to do with it, I will actually buy a couple more copies of your book, give them to people, signed by me, and say, I actually know her. But in all seriousness, because so many books that are on history, thinking of Elie Wiesel, for instance, that was an all-school read in the school that my son's teaching in, but it's hard because it is one story. But this is a road in about one family where you get to love the people so much that the horror of what happened to them is not actually the story. The story is their humanity. And I thought that was a genius. I don't know how to, do you understand what I'm saying? So often books on the Holocaust or World War II or some other horror want to hammer home the horror. So it's all pictures of railroad tracks, concentration camp victims, and so forth. Your family is the way I see them as human first and not as victims.
Exactly. And that's what's so important, right? These people are people just like you and I.
Yes.
And like anybody, they lived, they loved, they had families, they educated their families. They just wanted, family was first and foremost for them. I don't know if you remember the chapter on Ignaz Misner. Here he is, this celebrated lawyer.
Yeah.
And he said, the most important thing to me were my 2 grandsons.
Yes.
And I hope someday they'll become lawyers. And that was my father, who became a doctor. But, the most important through all of this was his family. And
yeah, absolutely. And that spoke so deeply to me. I once wrote a book that the title's a little on the nose and a little humor. There's sort of humor meant in it that's just called Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. So that's where I was coming from. That's not the oeuvre of my work. I've written novels and many other things. But that book was basically saying, you're not your career, you're the people you have relationships with. It isn't like you all have to be like me and have, 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren, but it's not about, success is not measured in my book by either money, income, or status, or career, or class. It's measured by the closeness of who you call when because you love them and they love you. So
exactly.
That's the best thing that happened to me this week was my son called me and said, "Can you help me, Dad? I've got to go into work early, and I don't know who's taking Nora to school. Will you come sit in the house till 5, wake her up at 8, take her to school?" And, the funny thing is he always asks that in a kind of a trepidation, like, is this an imposition? And what you try to let your children know as the years go by is that's probably the only day this week where I really know why I'm alive.
Wow.
I mean,
it's
seriously.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I mean that from my heart.
Right.
Like all the other stuff, lots of people could be doing it, but, I'm her grandfather.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean it. And I love your family, Linda, and I told you I love you because I've gotten to know you. Anybody that took the trouble to do this is a hero to me.
Thank you.
And I will do what I can to make that so. And so I just want to tell you, my gratitude is boundless for you taking this time. I want you to stay in touch with my producer and dear closest friend, Ernie. And when there are things we can do to help you,
oh, thank you so much.
Let us know, and let us know what we can do to share this information. We'll link to everything. When the book comes out next week, we'll link to everything. If you have a site, people, if something develops and you're doing a thing, please let Ernie know. We'll promote it. And we'll come back and talk more, because the Viktor Orban situation, that's a different discussion. Maybe we can bring you back as part of a panel where we're talking just about the direction of society. But you're a hero of mine, and I really appreciate this book. It just really meant so much to me. I read a lot, and very few books mean what this book meant to me. Really.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. That warms my heart, because I didn't know, as I said, I wrote it to connect to my family, and the fact that others are connecting. Again, we're all one big family, and that's proof of it, right?
Yeah, but you're a good writer. It doesn't happen by itself. You really,
thank you.
Your family who disappeared, and your present day family and everybody is so lucky to have you as their scribe, as their narrator, because, you know, maybe you wouldn't be so talented, maybe you wouldn't know how to do this, but your heart is in this book too, and it's beautifully crafted and really speaks. And I love the way you tell the stories, because they are dramatic stories, but you never go to melodrama. And so instead you let them live. And what emerges is not the horror of what they faced. What emerges is, I'd love to meet your grandpa, and I'd love to have dinner with him in his favorite restaurant.
I would too.
He's an interesting man. He's an interesting
Yes.
man.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you, Linda. And we'll do everything we can to make this book fly for you.
Thank you. That means so much. Thank you
Yeah, well,
so
it means
much.
a lot to me. This has been a real privilege talking to you. And you let
Thank
us know if we can do anything to help.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Blessings with the book.
it. Blessings
Thank
to
you.
you. Thank you.